Welcome to this first in a series of interviews with noted scholars on the content of the We the People, the Citizen and the Constitution text of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Greg Bernstein, Senior Consultant to the Center for Civic Education, and I'll be your host for the series. Unit 1 of the text focuses on the philosophical and historical foundations of the American political system. Our guest scholar today to talk about Unit 1 is Susan M. Leeson. Sue, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So let's talk about Unit 1 in very broad terms. As I mentioned, Unit 1 focuses on philosophy and history. Broadly speaking, how is learning about that background important for civic education?
Well, societies, just like people, are a combination of their history and their ideas. And Unit 1 explores the deep history of the American political system, which originated in the colonial times, and also the ideas that were so influential both to colonists and then to the subsequent framers of state constitutions and the United States Constitution. Unit 1 also gives us a framework for understanding unresolved tensions in our contemporary political system. We can take many controversies that we explore today, we can take them right back to roots in colonial time, and at least get a framework for understanding why they are so intractable and difficult to deal with. Unit 1's also about identity, both personal identity and group identity. How do we define ourselves? Why do we define ourselves that way? What associations give us nurture? What kind of people and associations challenge us? Those remain very, very current kinds of issues. And finally, Unit 1 makes us think about self-governance, both how we govern ourselves and how societies attempt to use self-government to solve their political challenges.
The first lesson in Unit 1 addresses the question, what did the founders think about constitutional government? For almost 2 centuries, what we now call the United States consisted of several colonies. What were the similarities and differences among those colonies?
Well, we'll start with the similarities. All of the colonies created by the Crown were organized according to charters or contracts between the Crown and the person holding the charter. So all the colonies had charters from the Crown. All of the colonies were very isolated compared to what the colonists' experience had been in their home countries. And that isolation had profound implications for how they lived, how they approached problems, how they solved problems, and so on. Moreover, most of the colonists came with very little money and very low social status. Now, there are also great differences among the colonies and the colonists. Those geographic differences affected the economies of the colonies. In the colder north, with sea coast and short growing seasons, fishing and shipbuilding and small farms and trade were common ways of earning a living. The middle colonies had a greater variety of farming opportunities, as well as river and international trade that included fur, livestock, and other raw materials. In the southern colonies, plantation farming was a common way of life. Some of the southern colonists apparently expected to find gold and diamonds to send home to the mother country. Instead, they wound up producing crops that included corn, rice, indigo, and tobacco for exports. There were also important differences among the colonies with respect to their geographic size and the number of people. Urban and rural differences emerged even within individual colonies. What's so important is that when we study the colonial era, we don't stereotype the colonial experience for the kind of person who became a colonist. The rich diversity that we see in our culture and politics today has its roots in that colonial past.
So tell us more about the charters that governed the British colonies.
Well, they were basically of 2 kinds. There were corporation charters and there were proprietary charters. The corporation charters were really business deals between the Crown and the holders of the charter. Examples are Virginia and Massachusetts. The officers and stockholders in the companies that had those charters were given great leeway about what they could do in the land they were allowed to settle, as long as they operated their corporation in a manner that met their economic responsibilities to the crown. The proprietary colonies, on the other hand, were essentially land grants and power grants from the king to a single individual. An example is William Penn in Pennsylvania. Another is Lord Baltimore in Maryland. Penn and Lord Baltimore basically had all of the powers of the crown in the colony. Now, even though they had all of that wonderful power, they had to attract colonists. And both they and the holders of corporate charters had to figure out a way to lure people to come to a place that's unknown, pretty terrifying probably, a long ways away from home, with not even a guarantee that a ship could get there safely. And so they had to make offers to people to get them to come. Religious freedom was one offer. Relatively cheap or even free land was another. But a big one for a lot of people was the opportunity to participate in their own local governance in a way that they had not been allowed to do at home. Now, what else became quite interesting is the Crown decided early on that the colonies were going to flourish if they were basically left to their own devices. So British monarchs did not establish colonial policies that were uniform and really in control of these new settlements. In 1775, Edmund Burke, in a lecture to Parliament, described this policy as salutary neglect. Let the colonies flourish. Well, during that century and a half, when the British were not enforcing laws, were basically leaving the colonies on their own with fairly loose trade associations, the colonists not only developed a strong sense of identity with their particular colony, and remember these are scattered all over the eastern seaboard, but also with the trade partners they developed, some with Holland, some with France, some with Spain, some with Portugal, as well as England. Moreover, colonists came from all over Europe. The holders of the charters didn't just target England for settlers. We had a remarkably diverse group of people coming into the colonies during that century and a half. So after the French and Indian Wars in 1763, when the Crown realizes we got a huge debt, we need to be extracting more taxes from the colonies, and sought to exert some power and control over the colonists, they encountered what today we would call great resistance and disobedience of British law.